Welcome to another episode of Smiling Again. I am your host, Kim Moore, and with me today is Martin Roscoe. So,
Hello.
Martin, hello, Martin. I'm so happy to have you here with us today.
It's good to be here, and thank you for inviting me along.
Thank you. It's today's conversation is slightly different than what we usually have. And it's different because today we're speaking to Martin from the perspective of being the alcoholic in recovery.
Mm.
So often we're speaking to the family members, and today a different perspective here with you today, Martin. So
Yes,
thank
yeah,
you,
definitely.
thanking you for your willingness to be here to speak.
So thank you for having me.
Mhm. So I know these conversations can be difficult, and I find that part of the recovery, an important part of the recovery is talking, and that with every word we heal, whether it's spoken or written or shared in some way, it's those things that are inside you that can hurt you the most, and it's so good to get them out.
very much, and that has been a big part of my recovery, actually, Kim. Being able to share my experience, my story with others that have had similar issues, and that support network that gets built up is really important. And I'm glad you said about writing as well, because I know it's something we're going to talk about in more depth in a moment, but one of the things I do try to do is I do keep a daily journal, and I find that helps me just, to keep track of what's going on.
It's a good way to check in with yourself, isn't it? Those thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
something that I started when I was early in recovery, and for me, it's almost 11 years, not quite yet, but God willing, when we get to June this year, it'll be 11 years. And it was something that was shown to me, and that I started doing in my early days of recovery. And I buy these journals that haven't got dates in them. You write the dates in yourself, and I've got these going back for the last 10 years or so. And it is good sometimes when you're not feeling so good, just to have a look back and see how things have happened in the past and how you dealt with it at the time, and what your thoughts were at that time. And that really is a massive help.
Absolutely. And I do the same. I journal, maybe not every day, but I do journal, and it's been a big part of my recovery for, my goodness, the last I think my first journal entry was in 2010, so it'll be
Wow.
13 years. So it's incredibly important to me, and holds a special place in my heart. So what I'd like to touch on briefly is, we're here speaking to you today. You have a family, your
Yes.
wife and two
Yeah.
daughters, and
Yeah.
they've been on this journey with you
Mm.
as well, haven't they?
They certainly have. And I mean, I was a problem drinker, an alcoholic for quite some time. Um, and particularly for me, I sort of, the last 10 years of my drinking that I did was when it was addictive, and when it was really, really bad. And that was, through the time, as you mentioned, I got two daughters. And it was through the time that they were coming up, through the important years of their schooling, into doing GCSEs and A levels and all that sort of thing. And actually, it's still something that I carry quite a lot of guilt and shame around, because I was not around much. My poor wife, bless her, would say things to me like, "Oh, please don't go to the pub today. We've got the parents' evening at the school tonight. We'll, you know, yeah, 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 that's okay." And then come that night, I wouldn't even be in Colchester, let alone going to the parents' evening. I was down in London, because I worked in London, so that, it was a typical thing to go out after work, and I'd be out after work in the pub and having a good old drink and what have you with all the people that I was with, and not even giving a thought. And and I say, I do carry a lot of guilt and shame around that, and but that's something I had to learn to accept. It happened. I'm not proud of it. Um, I'm certainly not proud of the way that it affected the relationship with my wife and daughters. Um, you know, that they would, and quite rightly so, I hasten to add, that, you know, if ever there was something they wanted to talk about, they would go to their mum and not me, because they didn't know what sort of way I was going to react. And that's not good. You know, that really isn't good. But as I say, I have learned to accept that that is what happened. And these days, you know, my life is the complete polar opposite of what it used to be these days. And I have a fantastic relationship with my wife and my two girls. You know, and I was able to do the first of the wedding duties at the end of 2021, in October of 2021. My eldest daughter got married, and I was able to walk her down the aisle and go through the entire wedding and everything else. Thoroughly enjoyable, and not even, you know, thinking about having a drink or anything like that, which was great. You know,
You've said so many things in there, Martin, that I could would like to just sort of dive into a little bit deeper.
yeah.
I, you know, it's wonderful that you're there with your family now, and taking part in life with the family. That's
Mm,
amazing. And you know, it's that alone will give so many listeners hope that it is possible.
mm,
I You mentioned that you weren't around a lot. And I know in those days of my husband's drinking, I always said that he was absent. And he might have been physically absent because he was out drinking somewhere, but often he was physically in the house, but absent behind a door
yeah,
because he just wasn't participating in family life.
yeah.
And you know, that's really hard for
Mm,
families. So hearing that you've rebuilt your life and you are present for your children and your wife is a wonderful thing to hear. You mentioned to me the last time that we spoke that there's no amount of saying sorry that's enough.
no, sorry became a meaningless word, really, because I'd used it so many times. You know, oh, I'm sorry for coming home late last night. I'm sorry for coming home drunk yet again. I'm sorry for this. I'm sorry for, and it became meaningless. And I don't feel that as much as I could, even when I got into recovery, of gathering them together and saying sorry, which I did do, of course. But for me, my way of showing that I mean it to them is by living the way that I live now, you know. And I do, I you know, I mean, I didn't do this on my own. I got a lot of help, and at the time I tried numerous different ways of trying to stop and give up and everything else. But I'll be honest with you, um, it's a bit of a long story, so I won't go there now because I know we haven't got the time. But I ended up um, going to AA, to Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was there really from the very first time that I walked in. And it sort of goes back to something I said a little while ago, that I felt there was a room full of people that knew exactly where I was coming from, had had experiences the same as mine, had come through it and gone out the other side. Some of them were still early, some of them were still working at it, some of them were very new like me. But it just felt so right for me to be amongst people that were able to speak on the same level. And I started on this wonderful journey that has been my recovery so far. You know, as I said, we're almost 11 years in, and I don't say that to, you know, to brag or anything else. I say that so that if there is anyone out there, you know, that is able to listen, and that it might give them some hope that it is possible, as you know, no matter how difficult it gets. So I didn't do it on my own, and I owe a huge debt of gratitude to all the people that have helped me along the way. But by living how I do now, that certainly in the early days helped to rebuild trust and rebuild those bridges, not just with my wife and my daughters, but other members of my family and friends as well, you know. And it took a long time, it took a while to get that trust back.
Mhm.
Because, as I said, I'd said sorry so many times, and it was meaningless. And so I tend, that's how I do it these days. I say sorry by living the way that I'm living now.
There's a lot of things there in your recovery story, Martin, that are very much in parallel with mine. So the family members, we have to recover too, and we go on a similar journey. And asking for support, reaching out for help is absolutely critical. Surrounding yourself with people that you can speak to on the same level, that they understand what you're going through,
Yeah, very much.
what you might be feeling and thinking, what you've experienced, because a lot of those experiences people just don't talk about.
No, that's right.
So to have that support around you and to change the things that you do, the way that you live, to live differently, I think is critical to breaking those old patterns.
Absolutely, yeah, and it is a complete. I view myself as being extremely fortunate to get where I am today, and I view myself as almost having had two completely separate lives, if you like. There was the old me, and there's now the new me. And this new me, I don't claim to be any sort of saint. There is a very good saying that I heard quite early on in my recovery, and you may or may not have come across it, but that someone said to me, "This is a journey, and it's about progress, not perfection." And every day you progress a little bit more, and that really struck with me, and it really stuck with me as well. And I view it like that if I can just, there are certain things that I do like the journaling, that helps me to keep focused, that helps me to keep an eye on what's going on, and actually how I'm feeling, and how what I do and say affects others as well, and that's vitally important. Like you said, that the family was affected massively, not just in the obvious ways I could mention, financially affected. That's an obvious one, because I was just spending so much money, but in the emotional ways that there's all sorts that it affects, and I'm fully aware of that now. I wasn't at the time, obviously, but I'm fully aware of that. And actually, something you said about when your husband, even when I was at home, I wasn't really present as such, because a lot of the time I was in no fit state to be sort of mentally present, or even and it was, I'd go to bed and go to sleep, and things like that. So I wasn't taking part in family life, and so yeah, as well as being physically absent a lot of the time, as you quite rightly said, even when I was here, there was this absence of such.
Absolutely. You mentioned in there that about your old life and a new life. And I think, Martin, I think that's one of the most important things for all of us to hear. And maybe that's the thing to take away from this episode, is that how you identify with yourself has a massive impact on your life. So before I identified as the wife of an alcoholic who was juggling everything, who was exhausted, who was just, unsupported and lost, feeling completely broken. That's how I identified myself. I can assure you that's not how I identify today. Today, I am courage, I am faith, I am joy. There's so many things in there. And it's just a switch in identity. And it can be as simple and as easy as that, and instilling that belief.
I think we have to, and I can only speak from my own experience, but looking back, I had to go through a radical change internally. I had to completely change my outlook. I had to completely change what my priorities were. I had to completely change my thoughts, and actually, as well as that, I had to completely change things like the circle of friends that I was hanging around with, and places that I go, and habits that I was into, and all this sort. And it is all completely different these days. It is vastly different. And I really do view it as having this second chance at life. But equally, and this may or may not be important to some, but it's important to me, I view my demons, if you like, as just that. And I always have this mental picture of this little demon locked up in a very rickety wooden cage in my head, and the padlock is on there. But for me, the minute I were to pick up an alcoholic drink, that padlock would be open and the demon would be out. And that is just a way that I use to keep it in check. That's just one of a few ways that I use, actually, to keep those things in check, because I don't want to go back there. I don't ever, I didn't set out in life to become an alcoholic. It's not something I wanted to be, but it happened, and it happens to an awful lot of people. But it's certainly not a life I want to go back to.
So you mentioned the demon that you picture. I think we can all relate to that, because we have I call it, that inner self-critic, that nagging person. I call him Bob. Bob.
Oh, I haven't gone as far as to give mine a name.
No offense to all the Bobs out there. I don't know why I called him Bob. I just did. It's what came to mind. And so now I have the self-compassionate me who's there to give love, to give support and encouragement. And that little person is has a much louder voice than the critic now. So it's drowned out the critic. And I just work at every day, keeping those voices in check, because they're always there. They're always both there. I like how you have a padlock on. I think I'm going to use that one as well, Martin.
That's there. And don't get me wrong, some days it is really hard. Summertime tends to be a really tough time for me. There's not far from where I live in Colchester, there is a pub that's got a really big beer garden, and you drive past in the summer and see everyone sitting there and having a lovely time and having a drink and you drive past and think, oh, surely, one wouldn't hurt. And those thoughts are dangerous, and those are the sort of thoughts that could be a trigger. But I've got to the point where I can almost instantly think, don't be silly. You know where it would lead, because I can look back, even when I first started drinking, years and years and years ago, I didn't ever really drink. When I went out, it wasn't just for one or two, it was always drinking to a point of being drunk. And it was never any different. And so I just had that addiction around it, and there's a lot of things comes along with addiction, which I'm sure you may well have heard of, but in what we do, as an addict, you become very manipulative. You become very good at manipulating situations to your own end, and that end is always chasing where's the next one coming from. And so there's lots of things I do these days. I won't go into a pub these days. I can't remember the last time I went into a pub. And there are odd occasions. When there's family occasions or whatever, you have to be in environments where everyone else is having a good drink. But that's fine, because they can, I can't. And again, that I had to get to a point of acceptance around that. And actually, you talk about the way that it affects families. My wife drinks, right? But my wife is perfectly normal around drink. She can have, maybe a glass of wine with dinner and leave it at that and what have you. But do you know what? For a long time, and it took me a while to notice, she stopped drinking, and there was no booze in the house. And I didn't cotton on to it at first. And then one day I happened to mention it. She said, oh, yeah, I won't drink because I'm worried that you will. And I'm thinking, oh, yet another bit of guilt that I had to take on myself. And I said, look, please, don't be worried. I'm working hard at this. If you fancy having a drink, then, and she does now, occasionally she will have a glass of wine with dinner, or if there's a family thing, she'll have a drink. And what if we're going out? It's good now, because if we're going out anywhere, I just drive. So I've got the perfect excuse not to, but even that, it's about putting things in place for me that all help in keeping, so if we are going to, a wedding, a birthday or whatever, I will always make sure I'm driving. That way I can quite easily keep that in my head. No, you can't because you're driving. Not no, you can't because you're an addict, but no, you can't because you're driving, which is perfectly normal.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to have a conversation with your wife. We must organize that. We could have a really good chat.
Definitely.
You mentioned things that make me, once again, I'm going back to the healing journey that the family goes on, and a lot of it in there is around boundaries, setting our own safe boundaries, which are really, really important, but also the patterns. And that's what I'd like to come back to is, recognizing the patterns in our life. So your old patterns in your old life and the new patterns in your new life. And then I think if we're aware of what those patterns are and we continually challenge them and replace them with even healthier challenges, that's the route to recovery and leading a healthy, happy life. And
absolutely. And for me, a lot of that in the early days, where as I mentioned, I worked down in the city, down in London, and the patterns, if you like, there was come lunchtime, most people, we all went to the pub, have your lunch break in the pub, and then come back to work. So what I started doing, because I found out they were there and I could make use of them, instead of going to the pub at lunchtime, I went to an AA meeting at lunchtime and spent my hour lunch break having a sandwich and a cup of coffee in an AA meeting in the city. And then I would come back to work, and then I would come home, and 3 or 4 times a week, I would go to another AA meeting locally here in Colchester in the evening. And so it was putting things in place that would break those patterns and break those habits that I had built up. And slowly over time, it becomes the norm. You do something often enough and it becomes, second nature almost. But I'm always on my guard. I know what could trigger me. I know that, I mentioned I don't go into a pub, and there's another saying that I got from AA, and it's quite true. They say, if you sit in the barber's chair long enough, you'll get a haircut, So it's about not going where that temptation is so in your face all the time. And so I don't. Yes, we go out to restaurants, and we might go to a pub that's got a restaurant in it with friends or whatever. I've learned to be able to cope with that.
Healthy patterns.
Yes.
Let's focus on the healthy patterns now.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I wanted to have a little chat through is your daily journaling.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that practice and what you journal about every day.
Well, and again, like you, there are occasions when you might miss the odd day or two here and there, but on the whole, I try to keep, and my journal is always on my desk right here next to me. And what I tend to do, I will have a look at, okay, what's gone on this day. So there's general bits about what I've been doing this day, what went well, if anything went wrong, what was it? Why did it go wrong? Actually, what have I accomplished today? What have I done? What have I managed to accomplish today? And equally, is there anything that I feel needs work on for the day? And actually, to finish that off, I write out 2 lists. I write a gratitude list, what I'm thankful for today. And I also, for me, a big part of my recovery is my faith. I am a practicing Christian now. And I write out a prayer list, things or people that I want to pray for today. And I find, by, like you said, by writing it down, not only is it helpful to look back on, but it helps me to keep a focus on those good habits, those good things to do, and I'm always looking for, have I been a bit selfish today? Have I done this today? Have I done that today? Have I been impatient? Have I been, stressy? Have I been, and if I have, then look into that and find out why, what triggered it. so that I can hopefully learn from that.
That's amazing. And I love how you have questions that you ask yourself to help you with your journaling, because I think for some people that can be the hardest part, is knowing how to get started with journaling. It's like writer's block, knowing what to say, what to do. And when I started, I just started to express my feelings because I was so numb. I didn't know what I was feeling. So some entries might have just been one word, and that's all I could manage.
Yeah.
So having those questions, I really like that. And I love that you end the day with your gratitude list and your prayer list, because those are just both so wonderful and positive. A wonderful way to finish the day.
Yeah, because I find sometimes, particularly if I've not had a particularly good day, because I still do suffer with anxiety and whatnot around it, even now. But if I've not had a particularly good day, it's not nice just to stop writing and leave something bad on the page. That's my way of looking at it.
Yeah,
and there is that way of, like you say, finishing on a positive.
Absolutely. There's always a positive to finish the day on. Absolutely. Yeah. On that note, I love to finish every episode with gratitude. What's something that you're feeling gratitude for at the moment, Martin?
Right now, I think that, I'm grateful that here I am on this journey, and that today is another sober day so far. I don't envisage that changing, but I am always so grateful for that. I am immensely grateful that I'm able to be helpful to people these days. If I look back at, I'll just go open my journal. I'll read one from yesterday. Grateful that I was able to pick Kevin up and give him a lift. Being in a position to be able to do that, to be able to help people out. Kevin's just a friend of mine that I happen to give a lift somewhere because he can't drive at the moment. And just being able to, and if we do anything, it's grateful for the life that I have now, I think. And those are the sort of things I write down. And if there's anything special happens in a day, that always goes down. But generally it's stuff around friendship of people, my family and friends. It's that sort of stuff. And it may seem like really small things, but to me they all add up, and they help me to keep on the straight and narrow, so to speak.
Absolutely. So loads of things that you've mentioned. We've talked about living life in a way that's positive. We've talked about how you can change your old life and create a new one.
Yeah.
And how you can have habits that are helpful, that keep you on track, like journaling.
Yep.
And ending every day on a positive note with some gratitude or a prayer list. There's so much there that's really, really helpful, Martin. I'm so grateful that you have been here to share your story with us. Thank you.
No problem. I would just say one more thing. Don't ever be ashamed either of going for professional help. Over the years, I've had about 3 or 4 different lots of counselling, professional counselling, and that's been a great help.
Absolutely. There's no shame in asking for help. And
no.
I'd like us to be living in a world where there is no guilt or shame, and we're asking for help. Everyone recognizes that that's actually a sign of courage, and that's really smart. Each time you ask for help, it builds your courage that much more.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a wonderful, wonderful thought to end with you today. So thank you so much for joining me today, Martin. If there's anything here that someone has listened to and resonates and they take action on it, I'm sure that they will be spending a lot more time smiling again.